Junto Club.
Okay, welcome to the 66th meeting of the Junto Club.
Almost number of the devil.
Almost. It is April 19th. So in 1727, Benjamin Franklin organized a group of friends to create a club for mutual improvement where they discussed topics around science, philosophy, politics, and business. We sort of just copying that idea a little bit, using this as a chance to have people read books, bring ideas, discuss topics to try to learn a little bit more, and improve ourselves a little bit. An excuse just to hang out. So that's the Junto Club. I'm Matt, joined by Shu and Michael, and today's topic is going to be on the book Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher. So look forward to that if you want a little bit of politics. But we always start off with a quote from Shu. Not Shu's own quote. He finds other people's quotes. He's not a quote maker yet.
No, but I feel like one episode he did maybe use his own quote, but yeah.
He's practicing. He's practicing. I think episode 100 on, Shu has to make his own quotes from then on. He'll have that would be enough practice. But all right, Shu, do you have a quote for us today?
I do not have a quote. I have multiple quotes. Like since we've done frequently now too, so I need to use on a chance to get on a quotes in.
Okay, I'm going to limit you to your favorite two. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So actually, today's quote is coming from a book, Art of War. So
Sun Tzu.
Yeah. So in light of recent events, so I think it's good to go over some of these quotes. So the first one I start with is, "Our warfare is based on deception. So appear weak when strong and strong when weak. Of course, it's always easily said than done. The second principle is know yourself and your enemy. So if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. And then the third one is the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. So the goal is win without fighting." This quote actually reminds me of a sensei that say during Aikido training. He's saying that when we practice martial arts, actually the goal is not power. The goal is control. I think something he mentioned specifically is control is more important than power. All right. The fourth one is the speed is the essence of war. There's no instance of a nation benefiting from prolonged warfare. I think that is a bit of common sense. Any thoughts? Anyone you want to pick out and talk about more? We can.
I mean, when you were talking, I was thinking a little bit about just particularly with the first two, sort of knowledge is power. Mm-hmm. If you can sort of understand, if from a more global sense, sort of where you are and where your opponent is,
mm-hmm.
then it's very easy to anticipate the end result and understand how you need to behave to get what you want.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I was thinking about the end goal is to win without fighting, or let's say not fighting in general. It reminds me. So
the ultimate goal of the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting.
So Shu and I have both trained martial arts on and off. For context for everyone, while Michael, we did some very basic boxing training for him in our lab during our grad student days. But we won't say he's an expert. But anyway, with that background context, I don't think I've been in a real proper fight. I've had some sort of minor scuffles when I was younger that never really evolved to a real fight. But there's been a couple of occasions where things for whatever reason, because I'm a chill person, but things have escalated. And I remember once one of the reasons I think I've never been in a fight, besides I don't go do stupid things in general, is a couple times where it's been an issue. My response has just been to back up and put my hands up and then just stare. So I had guys getting aggressive, where they're looking for a fight. It probably helps that I'm tall too. If I was smaller, maybe they wouldn't have cared. But what I remember is they were kind of taken aback. I think they were surprised to see someone just stop and put their hands up and just wait, not you're going to yell and do whatever or get weird, but just be my hands are up. If you step to me, we're going to be throwing punches, right? And then they've seen that and just backed away. So I feel that, those quotes kind of reminded me of that. Project strength and then you can avoid fighting. And sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think Shu told me that, when we were doing the boxing training, you said to me, what's the safest thing to do in a fight? And, run away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I
The
mean,
best self-defense technique.
yeah.
It's avoidance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did. Like, the last quote made me think, like, it was something to the effect of, like, prolonged war is no good for a nation or something. Like,
Yeah.
I was thinking about, like, well, there is an example of, perpetual war in the Middle East. And, but they're doing great. So,
Yeah, I don't. Well, yeah. We'll stop there, I guess.
yeah. It's
But
potentially controversial topic, but but there are. I felt like all of those quotes sort of, there's shows of power but not necessarily control. So
yeah, if you can quote unquote checkmate your enemy and make them give up without even having to like expend the resources of actually fighting, that's a big win. Especially if you're winning, you're probably going to get some of the resources they would have lost, gotten destroyed fighting you, right? So there's almost no advantage to like actually fighting. Yeah, if you can avoid it.
Yeah, I think I just ignite the work, so that's why I just revisit. I think it's just beneficial for everybody to go back to study Sun Tzu, or another excuse for me to go into ask Matt about what do you think about current situation
Which
in the
one?
world. No, Iranian war, of course.
Oh, we'll say it hasn't been maybe the greatest move ever made in warfare. Let's see.
Are you biased? You are.
Yes, I am biased. That's fair. I don't know what didn't the Strait finally open up? There we have something like a shaky peace for now. So, maybe we're on the other side of it, but it clearly wasn't as streamlined. I think Venezuela, we like kidnapped the president, like that, right? And there's no conflict. So in sense, you could say that was like a successful application in some ways of some of Sun Tzu's things, like very got the info, very narrow thing, and like won the war without fighting in a sense. Obviously, Iran did not turn out like that, and it became a bit of a clusterfuck.
and in the case of Venezuela, I've had a much harder time getting cocaine. So
tragedy. Yeah. I mean,
it's successful though.
But there are positives. There's silver linings to every gray cloud. Spiking oil prices has encouraged more people to look at alternatives to fossil fuels for energy, recognizing that it's relying on oil inherently makes you susceptible to events from other countries around the world. And if you just generate your own clean power at home, you're not relying on that. But so
okay. One silver lining. Okay, well, very positive. But were you surprised when it happened?
I mean, I guess mildly. I don't know. I feel like Trump has ranted about shit like that, but he also has ranted about so many things. It's hard to tell what's actually going to happen. But also, I mean, when was the last time we had a Republican president who didn't start a war in the Middle East? Like, it was kind of a tradition, you could say. So my entire lifetime.
Yeah.
So
I think back in 2016, I would have been like more surprised, like when his first term, like because he was just so anti war, that was one of his big focal point. Like, and and obviously this has had a response like that was pretty aversive, even as from his base. So just because I mean that was one of his things. Like, we do not go to war.
I've definitely seen some generally Republicans. I know some who like Trump that were like, why the fuck are we just being like Israel's lapdog and just like doing this because it's what Israel wants? That's like a narrative that's being spread. And I don't even know if that's really why he did it or not. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of positive reception. It seemed on both sides, like not just like obviously Democrats are like criticizing him, of course, but there's definitely some controversy on the Republican side as well.
So what are the whys for going to war?
I mean, I think a big one was them pursuing nuclear weapons, right? I actually haven't been like digging into this story that much, I'll be honest, but I think that's one of the main.
Yeah, I think one of a recent headline I saw was like they offered 5 years stopping uranium enrichment, and he wanted
Hmm.
20 or something like that. So
Okay.
yeah.
Wait, why don't they just send Tom Cruise in there and just blow that up? I thought we did that already in the movie.
I saw this in a movie. Is that not real? No, that was an unnamed country in that movie, not anyone specific. Okay.
You're right. You're right.
All right. Next mini topic. Have y'all heard about peptides and like the peptide trend?
I've heard about it. I like that's actually one I have not read into a ton, but I've heard about it. Yeah.
I saw an interesting video for a few weeks back, and then but there's a reason I'm bringing it up again. But like basically, with the success of like GLP whatever the weight loss stuff,
Hmm.
that's a peptide.
Yeah.
That's a peptide, right? And it's been effective. So because of that, people have started looking for peptides for all sorts of other things. And there's apparently a booming business in both like I hear both in like the LA San Fran area and also in New York City of people buying mostly Chinese peptides online on websites that clearly say like for research, not for human consumption, and then injecting themselves with it.
So
And these
what's yeah? What are peptides? Well, how do you define peptides? Is it some kind of chemical like medicine
yeah,
or what?
apparently it's an amino acid chain.
Hmm.
So that's is more specific but very broad. Like theoretically, these can influence a ton of things, and supposedly the peptides, people take them for everything, right? They're taking them for like building muscle, you know,
Hmm.
healing injuries. Obviously, losing weight is one that's actually
Hmm.
legitimate, not like sketchy. Mental focus, energy, hair, probably hair loss or anything, right? But you can find like many of these, and then there's like people who are like influencers who are like, here's my stack, and I take peptide BH137 for blah blah blah, and it's very
Hmm.
much like a tech bro version of essential oils. They're like, I take a drop of lemongrass oil and rub it on my wrist for whatever. Like it's all just feels very much like there's no legitimate like research in terms like we're going to do a controlled study and we're going to figure out the mechanisms. It's just like people are like, I did this and I think it helped with that, so then they take them. So there's huge room for placebo effects and people just be like bullshitting, but it's also pretty sketchy, right? Because essential oils, you're like, oh, you fucking you shedded the skin of a lime and put it in a bottle or whatever, right? It's not that
Hmm.
dangerous. I think those are pretty safe, even if they're not going to do a lot. These are people are injecting themselves with chemicals that may or may not be the amino acid chains that they even say they
Yeah.
are. So I feel like there's non-trivial risk. And I bring this up because I was literally earlier today, I was working out, and then some guy was with his personal trainer, and then he was talking to his personal trainer around me about how he started taking peptides for like injury recovery. And I'm like, oh, I'm like that's interesting. Like I heard about it online, like I'd seen some stuff about it, but I'm like, now I'm like actually starting to see this in real life. People being like, yeah, I'm just like buying chemicals from China, injecting it, for health. It's to be healthy.
Wow.
So
Interesting.
Yeah.
I
Why they had to buy it from China?
I don't know. That's just where I don't even know if they
I,
did.
I
The
guess.
video I saw, that's
Mhm.
where a lot of them are made.
Yeah,
Like
you're right. I
like
guess.
everything else in the world.
I guess US is more regulations and things like that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
No, I mean, I think this like goes very well with the my rant from last episode or 2 episodes ago about
Hmm.
sort of the need for more structured data collection for longevity.
Yeah, that was the last one.
Yeah, because
This is the missed research opportunity because everyone's not going to be reporting what peptides they're taking, so we won't get you know,
exactly.
that
No,
large
it's
scale
like
data.
people, yes, because it's 100%. Like just yeah, just random. You're gonna have placebo effect. You're gonna have just people taking different stuff, different
Weird
concentrations.
interactions and
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
Uh,
So
so what's
yeah,
your take on it? Is it like super dangerous or is it like
I mean, it could. I mean, all these things like they change like how your like cells are producing protein, right? Or like I mean, that's the whole thing with like GLP-1. It's like targeting. It's an agonist for a certain gene that, or like how a gene produces the protein it produces. So, I mean, it's changing how your body is functioning and signaling. So, I
Hmm.
mean, it can certainly go awry. I'm sure. How? Structured measurement will tell us.
I mean, I've
mm,
heard generally good things about GLP-1, like in the short term for health benefits. I've
Right.
seen like separate from weight loss, there's like other potential benefits it might have, but there's also like rumors and talks about long-term issues that might
Right.
be coming up. It's the thing we're only starting to learn now, right? And,
Mhm.
and it's also hard to untangle, because like it's primarily for weight loss. A lot of the people who are using it, they didn't necessarily have great diets before, and now they just eat less. So like, is it the GLP-1 or is there like malnutrition coming into play? So it's complicated, but I'm gonna throw out that just taking random ones that on a website that says not for human consumption and then like ordering them and then injecting yourself is probably not the safest idea. It's not like a bunch of people have died, so there's like yet, so there's level of danger. It's at least not going to immediately kill you.
Wow.
And
Okay.
but
Right,
Yeah.
but there's the question of like what type of weird, like, it's like the med I'm on makes me like seems to increase how often I get like colds and stuff like that, and it's like, there isn't like like data is just emerging that may like why that may be the case, and this was an approved drug for 30 years or something. So it's like, it's like we need. Unfortunately, there's no replacement for like decades of data and like better data collection. And obviously, if we have no data collection like we do with this stuff, there's no telling if it may lead to like increased types of certain cancers or, dementia or like different weird like neurological stuff. Like,
Yeah, you guys are such downers. The benefits are improved skin elasticity, right? For skincare, Like, I mean, yeah, who doesn't want that, right?
who
As,
doesn't want that?
as I'm getting older, I did that. And then there's a second is muscle growth. Then I've been struggling with muscle growth for a long time,
I
so
mean, anabolic
that's why.
steroids do a hell of a job in the short term. So,
But those have side effects. There aren't known side effects for these peptides, Michael. So
oh, I see,
Exactly.
I see.
Anti-aging and muscle growth. I mean,
I
yeah.
made a mistake. I brought this up to kind of shit talk it jokingly, and
Yeah.
Shu's like, "I'm ordering now."
Yeah,
I'm like,
Yeah.
let's go.
I mean, there are like some where there's like not terrible like data, like I mean, like ashwagandha and like there's some
Is
like
that a peptide? I thought that
well,
was
it's
just
not
like
as
a
peptide.
herb
No, I
or
mean,
whatever.
no. Like I guess there's supplements for which there's like
Yeah.
emerging data where it's like it may not do, it may not work wonders, but it like does help to some extent with like recovery and things like that. But
Mm.
like at least you can get like pretty you can get versions that are pretty pure and like there's some data to back up as opposed to like yes just things you are injecting and there's no data at all and it's just
Mm-mm.
sort of like thought experiment about why this may have a positive influence. So
All right.
Mm.
Sounds like business opportunity too. If it's everything that's crazy for it, maybe someone just need to start a company and make it more legit, and then maybe more. I mean, I'm clearly there's demand for it, right?
Yeah.
So someone's probably working on it already.
Well,
no
I'm
I,
sure Big Pharma is working on it, but yeah, like to do that for real, like
Yeah.
legally, legitimately, I'll say, it takes a lot more you got a lot of
Yeah.
regulations and testing and proof you got to hurdle, right? It's not
Mhm.
like because I like GLP-1 has been around for a long time, but it's only recently that it's like approved for weight loss stuff.
Yeah.
It's not that what these companies are doing is illegal. It's just definitely like they're like wink, wink. This isn't for injecting yourself, wink, and then
Mhm.
people are going to do what they're going to do. So
yeah, I mean, I'm all for, I guess, opening up treatments to people, but but at the same time, I recognize the population can be rash at times. So,
yeah,
yeah, like I want people to be able to make their own decisions, but yeah, because it is hard from a like yeah, start a company perspective, like the financial investment that's required for like the evidence generation and the regulatory clearance and like it's
Mhm.
time consuming and expensive. So
yeah. I hate to be on the side of regulations. Like it hurts my soul a little bit, but in this case, it feels like the regulations around medicine and like pharmaceuticals and stuff are like directly like you got to prove it works and doesn't hurt people or cause more harm than good. And it's like, yeah, that is expensive and difficult, but that's because that's what it takes to actually demonstrate that.
yeah.
And like just opening it up, like being like, yeah, people can take whatever pill they want if they just like agree, like, it's not officially, said to be safe. I feel like that's going to cause a lot more harm than good. Yeah, there might be some people who get access to something earlier, but if it really works, you should be able to get it through the system in a few years and then get it to people properly, right? And then there's going to be a lot more stuff that doesn't work, because if you make a random chemical, odds are it's going to hurt you and not help you, right? Like,
Right. It's just where, to me, like the regulatory like landscape is already very complex, but like there's part of me that's like it depends on where like a patient is, right? Because if it's like an experimental treatment that has a shot of working and the patient is like dying or something, like like where they are
yeah,
in life, you want to get them access as soon as possible. But if it's like, yeah, I'm a gym bro and my deadlift is 450 and but I want to get to 600 before the competition, and this experimental pill might help with that, like
yeah.
that's a
These
little bit.
peptides aren't for like saving someone who's like terminal on a hospital bed, right? They're
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the Instagram influencer who's coming up 30 fast, and yeah, she wants more elastic skin like when she was 19 again, right? Or
yeah,
yeah, the tech bro who isn't happy with his lifts and blah blah blah.
yeah, yeah.
But that's capitalist realism is all about, right?
I was about to say she's trying real hard to make a smooth transition here. He's doing an okay job. Main topic. So, I feel like the last few episodes I've been dunking on Republicans a little bit. So this is my chance to try to be fair and balanced and dunk on leftists a little bit.
Oh man,
So
I'm
anyway,
excited for both sides are bad talk today, man.
look, I got to fulfill a stereotype and be an elitist liberal who thinks everyone else is just dumb, right? Like, you are who you are. You can't help it sometimes.
Yes, a quick aside, I saw a stand-up comedian, like it was a stand-up grad show, and it was this guy who was he was in the military, he was like 75, and his entire set was just looking for applause, because every single thing was like, I hate Republicans and Democrats, and then just like purposeful pause for applause, and I was like, I despise this man.
All right, well, let's see
Anyway,
if I can.
so go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So anyway, now that we established Mike hates me right now,
Yeah,
let's
no.
move on. No, no, no. So anyway, capitalist realism. It's a somewhat popular book in like leftist circles. It circulated a lot around after the banking crisis. I think it had been originally published a little bit before that, but then it kind of got popular.
No, you mean 2008?
Yeah, after 2008. So let's just dig into it. So like, what is it about? So this book didn't create the phrase, but I think it helped popularize the phrase that, have you ever heard the quote, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism?
Actually, no.
No.
Y'all don't get online enough.
Yeah,
Probably
I mean,
touching
well,
grass
I
too
mean,
much.
I'm not a quote. Like, Shu's the quote guy.
So that's something that's passed around, and it, in essence, does do a good job of capturing the core idea. By capitalist realism, what he's really talking about is the idea that like capitalism is the kind of like the end goal, the final societal like organization. Like this is it, right? Like, every other way you could organize society and the economy is like inferior, dead, and gone. And this societal perception that like this is it. Have y'all heard of the end of history?
No.
There was, who was this?
It's a book?
It was an article. Let me get the. It was in 1992. This guy. Let me get the details because this is relevant. Francis Fukuyama he did an essay called The End of History, and this was basically shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall and stuff. So the USSR has collapsed. China's also sort of like restructuring, post Mao's death and like becoming much more liberal, opening up a lot. And the idea was kind of like democratic capitalism has won, and like this is it. Like there's going to be no more wars over ideology and stuff, and like the idea that this is it, quote unquote. Now, generally, people criticize the end of history, saying like obviously it's not. History is still happening, of course. In the time since then, lots of things have happened, but similar ideas is that, well, have we reached the end of society? I guess advancing or coming up with new ideas or stuff. So I'm just going to go through some of the big quotes and the core ideas that he brought up, and we can discuss them at random. So one is that he commented that capitalists claim the current system isn't perfect, but better than alternatives. So he kind of says this is like a depressive realism that views hope as a dangerous illusion. So, people you might imagine like leftists or socialists who are like, hoping for this like better idea, capitalists say, this is just like a fantasy world, right? And you actually do exactly see these sort of conversations where you're like, your ideas are unrealistic. It's a fantasy. It can't work in real life. And maybe they point to historical examples where similar things were tried and failed, to be like, there is no better option.
It's almost very similar to democracy, the argument about like democracy as
it's the worst political system ever made except for all the other ones, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
Another quote that I thought was interesting, he talked about something called like liberal communism, which he said constitutes the dominant ideology of capitalism. And his example was Bill Gates, who ruthlessly pursued profit as the owner of a massive, corporation. But then also preaches now, especially as he's gotten older, preaches ecological concern, social responsibility, does like charities to like help people and stuff. Which again, this was called liberal communism as a way of sort of like, you're going to address the worst excesses of capitalism without addressing the underlying structural cause of all the problems, which is capitalism fundamentally. But, honestly, when he was talking about the liberal communism, I was like, this really just sounds like mainstream Democrats, right? Who are like, they support capitalism. Basically, they're like not trying to like redo how our economy works, but they want, regulations on business, and they want, social welfare systems to like help people out and stuff. So I'm like, this is a fancy name for it, but it's kind of a run of the mill philosophy end.
So what you mentioned there's a lot of problems caused by capitalism. What are the problems?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
I'll skip to that now. So this is actually a quote. This is actually something I largely agree with him here, and I think it's probably one of the key points. Is that he says capitalist realism can only be threatened if it is shown to be inconsistent or untenable. So there's three main things he showed as like what he referred to as inconsistencies under capitalism. So that was climate change and the environment, that's mental health and bureaucracy. And this sort of inconsistency, I think, is like, I'm going to not talk about that. But anyway, so those were the kind of three ones he brought up. And he didn't really talk about the climate and the environment much, which I was actually surprised about. But he did talk about mental health and bureaucracy. So starting from the last one, bureaucracy, he kind of talked about this idea that like, are y'all familiar with the general concept of neoliberalism?
No.
Okay. Neoliberalism is like kind of the modern, like, privatize government services, deregulate and decentralize things. Like it's not libertarianism, but it's like, we're going to reduce the state and have more, and it's kind of this sort of like viewed as like pseudo-scientific way of trying to have like a minimal state that optimizes everything, heavily relies on markets to like do things. So as he presents it, he says like this neoliberalist idea of like, we're going to reduce the government and stuff actually increases bureaucracy. He brings up the examples a lot of universities. So he was a professor in Britain for context. So he's talking about how the education system has so much bureaucracy in it and all these issues, which I 100% agree. Y'all were both in universities for a long time. So y'all are also familiar with the sometimes insane levels of bureaucracy that exist in these systems. And there's been interesting articles about how like Yale has like more has as many administrators as like undergrad students or something like that. Like there are specific examples where it's like crazy. So in some of those ways, I actually think he's right, except that the examples he's done are not private businesses. They're like government institutions. So I'm like, I don't know if this is like really applies to like capitalism, right? And I guess it kind of is just one of the things, like, is everything in society like directly a cause by capitalism, right? Like, is everything comes back to the same thing, or is it realistic to be like, hey, not everything comes from that, right? So in my opinion, I'm like, you're right, this can be a problem, but I guess it didn't.
In the example you give, like government is basically kind of like anti-capitalist. It's I mean, the incentive in government is very different from the
Mm-hmm.
private corporations, right? Corporations try to, grow and make more money and profit, things like that, right? And the government actually is something different. Depends on the government, right? So
Yeah, and he does try to address this a little bit. To be fair,
mm,
like he talks
mm,
about how like in the effort to like deregulate and reduce government of the modern neoliberal political ideology, like that
mm,
leads to these sort of scenarios where you need this sort of like layers of bureaucracy to handle stuff. But I don't know, it still didn't sell for me.
yeah,
He also talks about stuff that I'm sure you've all seen with related to bureaucracy of like, regulations and things where like no one sort of takes responsibility, I think is the best way to put it. Like
mm,
you talk to someone and they're like, oh, there's a rule says I can't do this. And you try to like figure out where this rule comes from and they'll send you to someone else. And there's like no one, you can have a large organization and no one really claims responsibility over like deciding something. Sometimes like a law is passed, but then there's like interpretations on how to apply that law can like
mm,
vary a lot. There's a lot of
mm,
freedom, so things end up just happening, and there will be some documentation will say this is how we're going to apply this law without really, again, without any individual really saying this is why I'm the owner for that. And I'm sympathetic, but again, it reminded me of a specific case I had when I was an undergrad, and like they changed some policies with regards to like honors classes, right? Like this dumb thing. So like in my junior year, like something's not applying correctly to say like give me credit. So I go like talk to someone,
mm,
and basically I was getting like this sort of like, oh, these are the rules, this doesn't count. And I was like talking to the person, I'm like, well, when I literally took this course 2 years ago, like the rules were different and like this did count. So obviously you have to grandfather me in, right? But I guess they didn't write down, you grandfather people in, which is a very silly thing, right? So I was like, I
mm,
100% understand like the sort of like bureaucracy and like stuff that you're complaining about. But at the same time, after a little bit of argument, I ended up talking to like the dean, and the dean was just like, yeah, that's obvious. We're just going to sign off and you're going to be okay. Right.
mm,
So, like, to me, it's not there are systemic problems with a lot of bureaucracy and government organizations, but this isn't inherent to capitalism. And it's not even unsolvable. Often it just requires one person who says, yeah, I'm just going to make the decision and say that's okay and not
mm.
bullshit. Now, how do you get that to be like a large scale solution for this? I don't know. I don't know how you find people like that, but yeah. So that was one thing on bureaucracy. Any other
So
comments related to that?
yes, to I guess I do have a comment about the question, but main comment is about I think you mentioned about liberal, like neoliberalism. They try to actually make the government kind of smaller, like get rid of regulation and stuff. And then
Mm-hmm.
you also mentioned that actually they end up actually creating more bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I don't get that one. Like, why? How did I thought the goal if neoliberals try to make the government smaller, right? So how can you make actually the result is making it bigger by creating more bureaucracy?
The argument is sort of you decentralize things,
Mm-hmm.
and then there still needs to be oversight and like so the idea is if you have one central office that kind of handles everything,
Mm-hmm.
yes, you have this big government, but maybe it's sort of efficient big government in a sense. And then
Mm-hmm.
when you say like, oh, actually we're going to decentralize education stuff and let like, you know, an example was allow colleges to monitor themselves instead of always having someone from the government come in to sort of monitor and confirm they're meeting standards. But because of this, what this created is that professors had to supposedly like instead of being every few years someone from the government comes and like watches your class and does some other stuff, it
Mm-hmm.
meant they had to constantly be sort of like doing new paperwork and putting up this front of trying to follow the regulations and the new rules and stuff because they're always constantly self-reporting essentially on what they're doing. So even though in theory they're like, oh, we've reduced the amount of like top level government, you've ended up with more bureaucracy being laid on people. That was a specific example. Um, maybe it's true in that case. I don't think it's I'm not sold that it's like generally a thing that's going to happen where you try to reduce government and you get more bureaucracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Potentially sometimes like a centralized solution is the most efficient, but like with a lot of things, I think this is just like there's not a magic bullet that always works. it's going to depend on specifically what you're talking about, whether a centralized or a decentralized approach is best.
Gotcha. Okay, going back a little bit, like, what does he mean by, like, the title capitalist realism? Like, what does he mean by realism? Like, what is the core thesis of the book?
The core thesis is basically that like current society kind of views capitalism as not just like the default, but the only option. Like, and it's not just like everything else is considered antiquated, proven wrong, ineffective, whatever. And because this sort of like goes into our psychology, and he also, I guess for a little extra context, this guy's a fan of using like movies and books and TV as like references of like, he makes a statement, then he references like a TV show like Children of Men or something, or a movie Children of Men or something like that, as like an example of how this is like permeated psychology, which I don't know, it's not really the most strong arguments for me. But anyway, so the idea though is that via this media, he can kind of shows how these ideas have permeated the the consciousness of people, and that restricts what we're thinking and what we're doing. So what he suggests is like people need to be willing to sort of break out of this idea that capitalism is the only thing or the best thing or the only option, and think of the new better society we got to make. He doesn't present a claim on like what we should do instead, but he's trying to encourage people to be not like get restricted in their thinking, essentially, is how I'd phrase it.
Got you. So he's not totally against anti-capitalism, but he's just maybe it sounds like there's a tone of the anti. But however, he encouraged us to find a better system than capitalism.
Yeah, I would say when you read it, I think he's pretty much anti-capitalism. I don't think he's both sides in it, you would say, but I think he has some fair points about how you deal with it, right? Like I think he said something that like that he talked about in the past, like anti-capitalist movement was unable to post a coherent alternative to the political economic model of capitalism, right? Like and it makes a fair point, like if you can't do that, how are you going to address it? So yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but to your point, like his examples, like, and the example you mentioned, a lot of them is about government, like bureaucracy, but those are not actual where actually it's not example of capitalism, right? Capitalism are like big corporation, private business, and things like that, right?
I agree with you. We're obviously going to be biased on that. Trying to take his viewpoint, I think I think he and a lot of people believe is like capitalism is more than just the narrow economic system, but it influences how so much of a society works. So both the political systems and even culture are heavily influenced by it. And so then people trace problems to, sometimes maybe there's some legitimate to those traces. Sometimes it's a little bit imaginative, but they'll trace the problems back and say like, the core cause is capitalism. There's a lot of people, it's sometimes a bit of a meme where people be like, what's, every problem, they're like the underlying cause of this problem is capitalism. So.
Oh, I thought the underlying causes are just humans.
And why are there humans? Capitalism. No, I kid. But yeah, I agree. So for bureaucracy, I do agree. Like if he was talking about bureaucracy in a private company, and he did talk a little bit about like call centers and how they're terrible experiences, which is fair, but not like and that's often something that like a private company, obviously implements. But at the same time, I don't know if a call centers being shitty experiences is like some an especially meaningful problem in today's society, right? Like it's just kind of like you're not wrong, but okay, who cares? But bureaucracy was just one of the three big things, and I think so. Let's get to a couple others, because okay, so maybe you're not sold on bureaucracy, but mental health. Okay, so there's an interesting one. He had a stat that I thought was intriguing, which is in Britain there are 2 million people, I guess at the time of writing this book, that claim incapacity benefits. So this is some sort of like workman's compensation, can't work stuff. And he claims that a significant portion are really casualties of capitalism. Let me quote, a significant portion are people psychologically damaged as a consequence of the capitalist realist insistence that industries such as mining are no longer economically viable, end quote. So that's an interesting take. Is mental health obvious? I'm sure he's not going to say that all mental health issues are caused by capitalism. That would be a straw man, but a significant portion. And I mean, there is some truth that mental health can be affected by, your environment and what's going on around you. So, certainly you lose your job, that's going to not help and could potentially lead to someone to like having a mental health issue. But, there's a few steps back here, one, what is the real cause then underlying that? Because lots of people lose their jobs and don't have a mental health issue. And two, does that mean we need to like protect industries? Like if mining coal is no longer economically viable, are we mad at capitalists for not continuing a mine just to pay people even though it's losing money? Like to me, like this was like really crazy when I was reading this. I was like, I don't, what's the alternative, right? Like, so what, mining's not profitable, right? Like the good solution is like, hey, people sometimes lose the means of providing for themselves, right? Like things change. This has been happening for before capitalism. Things change, and your means of providing a living change. What we could do is provide support for people to help them transition to other jobs, right? That's like the common sense solution in my mind. But not to like blame a business for being like, this mining operation is no longer good, good, we're going to shut it down.
No, makes sense. We're not going to use technology because we're going to keep, we're going to keep people writing emails, for 8 hours a day as opposed to, chat GPT or, use self-service station at fast food or like it's sort of a very like I feel like this argument is so commonplace in the news now with like the advance of technology. Like where do we essentially restrict use versus or where like where do we restrict use or potentially like allow for like wages that are like not livable, but like still make humans cheaper than the technology. Like, yeah.
So what's the main point of this? The main point is that mental health is caused by capitalism.
Yeah, basically, a lot of the arguments, a lot of mental health issues are caused by capitalism, right? And that's showing that it's not, in fact, a good system, and there's like inconsistencies. And it would also add to the idea that in capitalism, like, you're supposed to work to support yourself, and like healthcare is privatized and things like that, right? Those are the sort of capitalist ideals, so then it's like, oh, capitalism gives people's mental health problems and then says they have to pay a lot to get help, and then blames them as an individual when it's like a societal systemic problem, and this is supposed to be presented as like a contradiction. Yeah, that,
I mean, he's acting like
How?
both of these. It's like he's acting like we're pure these are pure capitalist societies. I feel like, and I mean there are like elements of our societies that are like, and I would argue that a lot of you know, like a lot of the regulatory stuff is not pure capitalist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, nothing is pure, right? Even China is not, it's there's a lot of capitalism in there too.
Mm-hmm.
But I do, I'm kind of not understanding now. How does capitalism cause mental health? Just people losing jobs?
Well, like I said, you can at least, trying to argue for his point, you can at least admit that, like, obviously things that happen to you can influence your mental health, right? Like
Yes.
you see how you lose your job, that might cause like a mental health problem, right? If you're really stressed, you're like not sure
Yeah.
how you're going to support yourself, blah blah blah. So going from that, take a step back. Why did you lose your job? Well, because the capitalist who owns the business said it was no longer profitable to run this business. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's being shut down. You're all being laid off. So, why do we shut down a business because it's not profitable? Because capitalism is like the underlying economic philosophy, right? So, the last of the three, he said three things that he brought up as things that show capitalism is inconsistent or untenable. Was the last one was climate change and the environment, which interestingly enough he didn't really talk about that much. Like he didn't go into that one, but that's probably the one I've seen the most. in general of people being like, they'll say something like, obviously we have climate change is happening, we have like an environmental crisis, and I'm like, well, capitalism, only chases profits and wants exponential growth. So, it's impossible to solve like climate problems or the environmental problems under capitalism. And, climate change is potentially kill all humans, has the potential to do it if it goes bad enough, right? So then it's like, obviously this is not like a consistent or tenable system if it could potentially lead to the death of all humans. So, which if you just take it as face value is actually a pretty good argument. Thoughts?
I mean, I guess like it's fine, but like I guess when it comes to capitalism, we're saying like, okay, like everything is profit of the company.
Mm-hmm.
Would it still like? I mean, I very much view like if we think about sort of company ethics, like company ethics are often rooted in sort of like utilitarianism, right? Like everything is translated to dollars and cents, and it's like let's do the net benefit here for the company based on dollars and cents, and that like if our product kills however many people and we get sued, like I mean, it's 10 million a person. If making this product cheaper is, going to give us more money at the end, and we kill 10 people, like that's what it is. But I guess when it comes to like, yeah, the environment and like thinking about that, like ultimately, if we get to sort of a point, like, and I feel like some companies have already seen this. Like if we get to a point, or are already sort of doing this, like where they advertise like better environmental consciousness and things like that. Like if it's
Mm-hmm.
helping their bottom line, sort of having that environmental consciousness, I mean, that's still capitalism, right? I mean, so it's more just like do they, does it get to a line where, it's like, oh, we've screwed up the world so badly that like there is no sort of, going like is the line drawn too late, perhaps, but I mean, I don't know that like environmental consciousness is like not a part of the consideration. Like or
No.
could, it doesn't have to be part of the consideration.
Yeah. Well, that's a fair point. They're not arguing against it. I don't think like I think it'd be fair to say that like the greenwashing that companies have done up to this point generally isn't meaningful. So on one hand, there are companies that are working on like new renewable options, better batteries, stuff like that, which I think will have like very, very much have material
Right.
impact. But when, Exxon Mobil and a BP make some do some stunt about, green algae for producing oil, like it's bullshit. It doesn't matter. It's just a PR stunt, right? Like it's not really going to do anything. Um, so I do kind of agree with the idea that companies aren't going to fix this problem on their own generally, barring them being replaced by another company that has an eco-friendly version that's better, right? Like barring other energy sources becoming more profitable, it's not going to change. And then you could also say, and I agree that potentially consumers could, you know, apply like could change the demand, right? It's
Right.
theoretically possible that consumers say we are concerned about the environment, so we're going to use our spending power to do that. And if they did as a block, companies would be forced to adapt to that demand, and that could solve it. But in practicality, that's never going to happen, right? Like enough people aren't going to choose for the more expensive product because it's environmentally friendly. Like that's not a realistic scenario, right? So where does that leave you then?
My main argument is going to be is that China has the worst environment like pollution in the world and is a communist country, right?
Yeah. So actually, yeah, she was actually leading, basically saying what I'm going to say in more words, but totally agree. I think of this problem orthogonal to capitalism. So, like, kind of not like they're two separate issues that function on different axes. Because, as you mentioned, the USSR and China, even earlier China, when it was much more communist than now, they ruthlessly exploited fossil fuels, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, what's the real fundamental problem here? The fundamental problem isn't capitalism. It's not even your economic system. It's that energy is really important for improving human welfare, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
energy is critical for the society developing and us to be more prosperous. And until relatively recently, burning fossil fuels was like our only good option. And then we kind of had nuclear plants, which was good, in the 60s or whatever, and that's good, but it's pretty hard to do. And there's these concerns about nuclear weapons and stuff. And then it's only relatively recently that renewables and all of their alternatives have become viable, that the technology has improved. So like the core thing is it's really not like we've seen different economic systems both exploit fossil fuels just because they need energy. The problem is a scientific and engineering one. Like I think that's how I view it, because if and when, renewable energy becomes more profitable, more efficient, more effective, they'll take over naturally. And I actually think you're seeing that right now, right? Like if you look at the exponential growth in things like solar, wind, battery technology, blah, blah, blah. Even in the US, most new power generation in the US is renewable. It's not fossil fuels. We're not building a lot of new ones. The ones that already exist, they've already had the investment made, so they're still being run. But there's a clear trend moving away. Now, will the market have that happen fast enough to solve the problem? I don't know. But I'm not a pure libertarian. You need to have an absolute free market. It's totally fine, in my opinion, to have the government sprinkle a little bit of regulation, right? You say, okay, this thing is causing a problem. We've now learned that CO2 emissions cause a problem. We're going to tax it, right? Carbon tax. Boom. That accelerates the change because, for obvious reasons. So I actually think capitalism as a framework has a lot of good tools for addressing this issue, which isn't unique to capitalism at all. That's how I view the environmental problem. If there was a leftist listening to this, they'd probably be really upset about what I just said, but that's how I view it.
All right. No more comments from me.
No more comments. Well, it was a good comment, Shi, though. I liked it. But yeah, that was pretty much, that's kind of the core of the book, though. He talked about that stuff. I'll just say as some kind of choice funny quotes.
Before you go there, I'm still kind of confused what he mean by realism, though. Like realism, why he used the word realism? Like,
well, he just had to use a word. He had to create a term, so I think it's just made up. I think realism is that like the idea is like only capitalism is only realistic option is maybe the closest way to phrase it. And it's the idea, right? The idea that only capitalism is realistic as an economic system. Other options aren't realistic. So capitalist realism.
Okay, sounds good. I thought maybe, as I think about it, maybe he's talking about realities of capitalism. Is that why he's calling it? Okay.
No. But yeah, some funny things I thought. One, so he was a professor, but he was a professor like 20 years ago now. So he had a comment about how, quote unquote, modern students are not able to hold attention because of devices, electronics, and stuff. And I was just like, I'm like, okay, if you were like concerned about that in 2005, what would you say in 2025, 2026, right? With modern students who grew up, had COVID happen during like prime years and stuff, and smartphones when they're babies and things. I'm like, oh, this just sounds like a old man yells at the new generation thing.
Yeah, that's right. Because it happens every generation, right? You always think about, there's a new thing now. It's getting distracted. Back in the day, it was probably TV, and then books, even books, novels, and things like that.
God, there was someone, I don't remember if it was Aristotle or Plato or Socrates, but one of those guys had a rant about how like the new generation like doesn't respect their elders, and they only care about like gambling and games and drinking and blah blah blah. It doesn't work hard. Like it's very much like straight like a boomer ranting about millennials, but it's like literally like 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. I guess your point is then complaining is
complaining about the next generation is a tale as old as time. So
yes.
Either generations past were absolutely amazing and we've just been downhill since then, or people have biased looks when they look at kids and get annoyed at things that kids have always done. So yeah. Well, one other quote to wrap this up that I thought was interesting. Let's see where I have it. Okay. The results feel very much like the actual moral texture of the Reagan-Bush era, a supersaturation of corruption that fails any longer to outrage or even interest. So the context for that is talking about how, corruption was just kind of being ignored. And this was in, again, this was like 15 years ago, this was when it was being written out, and he's referencing something from further back than that. In hindsight, though, in our current time, I feel like we have it's fun. I thought it was funny because our modern example, we have a much more extreme version of that, right? Like, obviously, with the Trump presidency and stuff, there's all sorts of accusations of corruption, we'll say, or things done that violate, standard political norms. That happens all the time, right? And it's come to the point where like Trump does something outrageous every week, so people don't care anymore, right? They just move on. And I'm sure you've heard things like if anyone else had done this, it would have been the end of their career. But for Donald, it's just like another, it's just another thing, right? So it just kind of I thought it was amusing how like I guess it's kind of like sometimes you don't realize how good you have it. If you think in the Obama years or some level, or maybe the Bush years, even the George W. Bush years are like some level of insane corruption. It's like, oh, it can get so much worse, right?
Yeah.
She's unconvinced. He's like, what are we
No,
talking about?
I'm just
There's no
confused by
corruption.
the actually I'm reading a quote and then I actually still don't understand what his point. Like is the book easy to read? Like is it a good, like very easy? It sounds like there's a lot of fluff in whatever. And it's the quote is really I don't know what he write. Either my English is terrible or probably, but I just is not in a level that is beyond my easy comprehension.
You're not wrong. I was gonna talk about this, and then I decided I'm not gonna discuss that. The writing is a little tough. In the sense that I feel like he's trying to fluff up stuff a lot. British. Like honestly, there were literally words.
He's academic.
Yeah, there were literally words I was googling what they meant and I consider myself fairly well read. And it's also like the examples, like cultural references that are really niche and just like a really fluff way of talking instead of getting to the point. So it takes some effort to try to like parse like what they're really trying to say. I had one specific quote that I had. This was actually from the forward, but it just stuck out to me. So the quote was the sense of hopeless entropy. And this was used really, what they meant was just hopelessness, right? But like writing hopelessness would be so direct and obvious and uncool. So I'm going to say the sense of hopeless entropy. How does entropy relate to hopelessness? It kind of doesn't make sense. I kind of get the vague vibes of like associating the physics of entropy with hopelessness, but like it's such like that's the sort of language that is used somewhat regularly.
He's writing a dissertation, PhD dissertation, not a book for common people. I'm kind of surprised that Amazon have a pretty good like 5 reviews on the book. So
I think my personal opinion is people who write like really fluff up writing like that is because they're trying to appear like they have something better, more important, more intellectually grounded than it actually is, right? If you really had something solid, you just say it straight and obvious because you don't need to like fluff it up. But sometimes you got to fill out pages, right? So
if you can't convince people, you gotta confuse them, right? We said it before.
That's right. That's how you get a PhD, right? When you're trying to defend yourself.
Yes. Yes.
Because if they're confused, maybe they're wrong. Maybe you're wrong, but maybe they're wrong, and they could, do they want to take that gamble?
It's the self-doubt, right? You infuse on people.
It's not the easiest read. I've read a little bit of like leftist stuff because I'm into politics and I read things from people I don't agree with. So some of this is like a little bit of like a bubble of like they have their own terms and stuff of way of talking about things, and like once you learn a little bit it becomes more parsable, but it's definitely not written to be easily accessible. It's not made so like some rando would be like, oh yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Which your opinion on whether that's good or bad.
Okay, and then the other question, if is the language and you feel like the writing is not it's very hard to parse. How did you power through? Now, how did you keep going? Actually finish the book. I usually if I encounter a book like that, I would just just move on to a different book.
It's not so bad that I couldn't understand it. Like the majority, I could get what he's trying to say.
I forgot you read a lot of PhD dissertations.
Yeah, that's right. And then of course, if it wasn't for trying to do it for this meeting, I probably would not have finished it. I'm gonna be honest, but I'm like, I wanna get through it so I can talk about it.
Nice. So, I guess a lot of the reason why you read this book, pick it up and read it, is because you want to
I
understand how the left think about capitalism.
Yeah, I just saw it in a bookstore and I'd heard about it.
Mm.
Um, and like though I've heard the quote of like it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And I assumed incorrectly that this book was the originator of that quote when it's not.
Mm.
So I was just like, like let's see what they say because I don't agree with leftists generally, but every now and then I get curious enough to like read about what they think and what they say because it's almost like I mean part of it's trying to be honestly intellectually engaging with people you disagree with to learn more. Part of it's almost like a morbid curiosity because it doesn't make sense to me. So I'm like I don't like trying to understand and interested in
Mm.
how they explain their views, right? So
Got you. So that actually two fundamental if books on capitalism, right? And
Communist
then
Manifesto
yeah, and then
and
the
then
other one,
Das Kapital.
yeah, and the other one is Adam Smith. What's his book?
Oh, Wealth of Nations.
Yeah. No, I think to are you going to read those books eventually so we can talk about it? Actually, have some more like grounded. What do you call that? Authority, right? Those are the fundamental books about this, right?
Yeah, you could. So I don't feel like capitalists. I mean, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, like it was a good, like I think it was like an important step, but I don't feel like capitalists refer to it almost in like a Bible sense, like the same way people
Mm-hmm.
do for some of Marx's writing. If you're on the
Mm-hmm.
left, yeah, there's a lot more of like, well, what did Marx say about that sort of discussions? I haven't read. Well, the Communist Manifesto is short. His bigger works were Das Kapital, right? He had like 3 volumes.
Right.
Um, I haven't read them, but I read a book about them. One, they're in German. You can get the translated versions. But
Mm-hmm.
I read a book that discussed them, but also included things like history and other information about
Mm-hmm.
them for context that I thought was pretty interesting once. So, I feel like that's as far as I'm going to go. I'm not going to
Yeah.
try to read it straight. Those are longer things, but we could
Yeah.
potentially talk about that. But I don't think it'd be a very fun topic. I'm going to be honest.
But no, notes are no. I'm assuming I haven't read it either, so I'm assuming they notes are actually have some very strong criticisms of capitalism, right?
Yes,
That's why he's of course advocating communism, right, instead of like capitalism. So I wonder if you, I guess my question is like, do you see any relationship between these books? Any reference or any comparison about the problems? Like,
Oh, definitely. Like, I mean, almost all leftist literature in some ways refers to or draws from Marx. So, like, that's always going to be true, their relations. And I think it's very common in a lot of them is there will criticize capitalism with a lot less, but have a lot less sort of substantive ideas on what to do to replace it, which this book actually addressed, which I appreciate it saying that, like being like, hey, you have to be able to propose something, but it didn't propose anything, right? And again, that wasn't the point of this book. Marx came closer to proposing alternatives, but yes, he had some strong criticisms of capitalism. This is really getting off topic, but I don't think a lot of those claims by Marx are bunk. Like, and a lot of people will be like, Marx is right. Like, look around the world, they'll be like, Marx is right. You know what? One of the criticisms of capitalism was,
yeah,
he said, This is what the thing. The law is something like the law of the rate of profit to fall, or like the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. He was convinced that over long term, businesses would have their profit rate fall because of the competition of capitalism driving prices lower and lower, right?
yeah.
And this would make eventually make investments and the normal capital nonsense that's going on untenable. And I'm like, I get why he said that, but I feel like it's pretty easy to look into the modern time and be like, hey, actually, large businesses are making plenty of profit, and that whole thing didn't happen, right? So and that's not there. I could go through a few of these where you're like, well, he said this, and people are like, Marx is right, and it's like he wasn't. Like he was trying to make predictions from was really early capitalism, so I don't blame him for being wrong, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I could do a better job about describing how society is going to be in 150 years, but like don't treat him like some sort of prophet who could see the future, right? Like he was wrong on a bunch of stuff.
Well, I guess the immediate question, like, does he talk about climate change and the mental health and bureaucracies as problems of capitalism? Like,
Oh, does Marx?
yeah,
Um, Climate change and bureaucracy, no. Mental health, yes, actually. He describes it
really?
as alienation is
Mm,
the term that he uses. So
mm,
in capitalism, workers are alienated from their labor is how we describe it. So the idea is kind of like, you kind of go old school. You have a carpenter who hands makes chairs and sells them in his own business, right? Like you feel invested in the work, like the chairs are yours, like you feel, a sense of pride and accomplishment and blah, 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 and ownership over that, right? But if you're just like a factory line worker, maybe you're also making chairs, but if you're just like doing something on a factory line and you're easily replaceable, it's low skill, whatever, you're alienated from your work. You don't feel like you're being productive or important necessarily. You don't have ownership over what you're doing. And, that can cause, that's one of the things he talked about that, kind of one of the things he talked about in terms of capitalism, like causing like societal and mental health issues. Maybe not, I don't think he described it as mental health, but like, that's how we would say in modern times, right? So alienation is a term you'll see in discussions about this.
Okay.
I think at the time, I don't think they knew anything about the environment really changing. I don't know. Maybe someone would be like, actually, he wrote about this. I don't remember that, or I didn't read it. Bureaucracy, I don't know. I don't remember anything specific about that one either. But
sounds good. Yeah. Going back to you talking about your example about like modern capitalism, like profit, I still kind of confused about it a little bit. Like, what do you mean by the profit doesn't fall? He predicted the profit gonna fall from the company?
he predicted that over the long term, companies' profits would fall, like be reduced. Like let me
the
Google
margins,
this.
right? The margins, maybe. Which kind of makes sense. That sounds right to me. Depends on the business, I guess. That's business dependent, right?
Yeah.
Just look at Amazon. Amazon the margin is very thin, right? Even though I feel like that's benefit to the society. Why is he? Why? I guess to me, I feel like that's a benefit of capitalism, right? You have competition, and then like Costco, right? They create a lot of benefits for consumers, and then their margin is very thin, right?
I kind of agree with you. I think that was presented as one of these internal, contradictions or internal tensions where like, yes, you could say it's good for the consumer, but is it eventually going to cause capitalism to collapse? Because businesses, if capital stops making money from investments, does the whole system break down, right? I think that's
Or you just a bit like, well, I guess you just have a better company like Costco or Amazon, more efficient, right? So
no.
okay. All right. I think you should go back and read it so we can talk about it again in more detail.
You want more detail?
I know it seems fascinating to me though. Like I don't know. So
I mean, it is interesting, and Marx was an economist, so like a lot of this stuff was phrased from like an attempt to be like doing like proper economic like study, not like strictly just like abstract political theory. But he had mathematical equations on how stuff like surplus value and other things were supposed to be calculated and things. But
really? Okay, sounds good.
Another time though. All right, Michael, where's your questions? Shu's doing such a good job.
I mean, I get okay. Well, okay. I'm curious. Shu wants to go back in time to Marx, right? So, I guess who are are you aware of voices currently that are anti-capitalist that may be presenting viable alternatives or better alternatives, and what might those be?
I'm not aware, and there's.
What do you have done? No, Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren.
Well, I mean, again, like this guy acts like we're pure capitalists. Like they're working within capitalism, like adding, sort of like more.
Yeah. Well, Elizabeth Warren has stated that, quote, she's a capitalist to her bones, end quote. Something very close to that.
Gotcha.
I'm not convinced Bernie Sanders would say the same thing, but I think, as Mike says, he's willing to at least work within the system rather than just be like, we have to like, destroy it and build from anew. I'm sure there are people who will say they are voicing a viable alternative. I'm not aware of any that have said anything of note in my mind. I feel like the only things I've seen are largely like this, we'll just say similar kind of socialist ideas that I feel like history has already showed don't work. So it's kind of like, nothing that's been, to me, have been interesting or of note. But that would be an amazing topic for you to research, Michael, and get back to us on.
Okay. I'll start there.
I don't know. My opinion, if we're really just broadly, is I don't think capitalism's the end, but I think it's probably the end until we get post-scarcity. I think with eventually the boom of AI and robotics like replacing labor, which, I mean, it kind of seems like it might not be as far away as people might have thought, 5 years ago. I think that's going to push things are going to have to change a considerable amount, right? If most people don't need if we don't need most people's labor to support them, like what do we do, right? Like, people aren't just going to be like, well, I guess I don't, can't work and then just like lay down in the street and die, right? So you're either going to have to come up with a solution that supports people, or you're going to have like mass riots and stuff. So, but this is something a lot of tech people are talking about these days, right? Yeah. So it's not exactly an original statement here, but I do think that will be the shift away from capitalism as we know it now.
Do you think that's as the tale, like complaining as a tale as old as time as well?
I think, yes, you're kind of right. But there's a question of like, is it different this time? And there have been times, because like there have been times where society is like fundamentally restructured because of a technology, right? Let's take like the invention of agriculture, right? Like that changed everything about how humans organized and lived. And it wasn't, was someone before agriculture might have just been like, oh, instead of gathering berries randomly, we're going to throw some seeds on the ground and gather them later. Like, is it really that big of a difference? But it turns out to be yes. I do think that like AI and robotics is going to be a lot bigger change than other technologies, because the scope of what it does is much wider, right? Like at some point, you're not saying I built a machine to do XYZ specifically. You're saying I built a machine that can do anything a human can do. That gets a lot, that's quite different.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
sure.
I guess like previous technology like upped the efficiency with which we like did things that we require for survival, like gathering food, like getting food, like moving throughout the world, things like that. But like
productivity.
Yeah, productivity. Like it upped the productivity. But now it's like the entire process would be like, we no longer require any intervention to have what we need to live. So
And let's remember that, like, yes, a lot of, like, obviously as technology's gone, way less people are farmers, but we have a bunch of other jobs, but we actually do have less jobs overall. Like the amount of people who work and the amount of hours they work is lower than they've ever been overall, right? Like more and more people are in college and take longer and longer time for education and training. You're not getting a job at 15. And more people have long retirements where they retire and then they live for like a long time in old age, which is nice, but it also consumes a lot of services and labor, right? So we have a bigger percent of the population who's effectively not working. And I think what you're going to see is something like a sigmoid graph, right? Like that's been increasing, and then at some point we're going to hit like this sort of turning point where AI and robotics kind of really explodes like crazy. I'm not saying that's going to be soon. Maybe it's in 40 years, right? And then it's going to level off. And I think for as far as we can see, I think there's always going to be room for some jobs and stuff. Like people are going to be doing labor, but it doesn't have to be everyone's replaced. It just has to be like enough people are replaced to be a problem, right? Like if you replaced 30 or 40% of people who work right now with robots, that's a massive problem, right? Like it doesn't matter if there's a bunch of jobs that can't be replaced if you can replace that sort of volume. And people talk about this stuff like how long until we get automated trucks, right? Because like we kind of already have self-driving vehicles that work, it's only a matter of time. And there's a lot of truckers and there's a lot of people who run cashiers, and like companies already, allow self-checkouts and stuff. How long until a lot of these high labor and high percent jobs, end up getting trashed eventually completely. And it seems like most of the jobs that are going to be left seem like jobs that take like a super high amount of training and education. Like, Because like a doctor, even if ChatGPT can actually do some of, let's say it can, you have an AI that can do some of that diagnostics and stuff. I don't see a future where you don't have a doctor being like part of that, right? Like using it, discussing with it, and yeah, someone to sue. Even if it's the greatest AI ever, they have to implement the idea. And if it's not the greatest AI ever, you want a doctor double checking things. But that's not necessarily the case, right? Like, well, as long as once they make sure that the self-driving truck doesn't like, just ram into the other side of the highway, you could have someone in a call center who every now and then has to go in and remote control it. Like if the system fails, like it's not that big of a deal, right? So I think it's going to be, I mean, this is not like a hot take. There's tons of people have talked about this sort of idea. It's going to be bigger change than before. And we're going to have to do something different.
Uh-huh.
All right.
I feel like there's about 100 podcasts, maybe 1,000 that have already talked about this. I'm pretty sure Elon Musk has talked about exactly this on some podcast.
Wow.
Yeah,
Or
especially
you can
now
go
with
back-
the physical AI stuff. Everybody is talking about it actually.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So,
You can also go back to our UBI episode that Matt did.
That's
probably
look. I've had the solution for a long time, guys.
mhm. Yeah, I guess. Okay. Conclusion to this is, I think the main question he does ask for, like, I think to his credit, I guess he does have a good point of like asking us to come out with maybe alternative, right? So
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. Like being trapped in the idea of that, like what exists right now is the only option is not good. Like I think people should, think outside the box is a very childish way to put it. But yeah, even if all of his criticisms I don't think quite land for me, like, I think there's a point here that's true.
yeah. And then I guess always there's always like no pure form of anything, right? So even capitalism, communism, democracy, or on the socialism, is always never being implemented in the purest form anyway. So, but
That's
yeah.
true. Except for, what is it? Is it Somalia that's supposed to be like the libertarian dream? I feel like there's some country where like people have joked about libertarians going because there's like almost no laws.
Okay.
I don't know.
I thought that's an anarchy.
I don't know.
Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
All
All
right.
right. So I think the main point is look for alternatives, think outside the box. I think that's a good point.
Okay.
Alternatives or wait for post scarcity and they're forced.
We're all waiting for post scarcity. Who wants to go to work tomorrow? Oof. All right. Any outro quote for us, Shu?
Just a reminder, I guess. A quote from my sensei is like what I said earlier. Power is not important. Control is.
Junto Club.